I'm Marcia Sanders. I am at the Northwest Arkansas Education Service Cooperative, and we're going to take a look at the Common Core. And this is kind of a Common Core 101. So if you're a K-12 teacher, I seriously doubt I'm going to tell you anything new that you don't know today. So, we just wanted to take time in this to do a bit of an overview because we had such a diverse audience. We thought we'd give you time to hear. And I'm going to go through just a little bit of background on the Common Core, and I'll talk briefly about the math and then about the literacy, and then hopefully there will be time at the end. If you have questions that you want to ask, I'll be more than happy to either answer it or take down your contact information and research it and get back to you on it, because I don't promise to be an all-knowing authority, although I have been working with it a number of years. All right, and I kind of am going to have to get used to this, aren't I, because I hit that too fast. All right, I hope you can see this. It's just a little bit of background information about the Common Core standards, and actually it's not what I thought was going to be there. I may have loaded the wrong one, but we'll do it. We'll make it. What I wanted to show you was a chart at the beginning of scores on the Common Core and how in the past, in NCLB times, and I think I'm supposed to stay over here, so I'll try to do that. I'm sorry. Prior to the development of Common Core state standards, what we had, yes, Bree, do you need something?
Yes.
I had some charts that I was going to show you that if you're familiar with the NAEP, the National Association for a National Assessment of Educational Progress. That is the only test we have given to K-12 students in every state. It's not given to all students, but it is given to a random sampling in every state. So it's a really good measure to compare how all states are doing with each other. And when we look at the percentage of students prior to Common Core that we had proficient on their state test, and then we looked at how that same state performed on the NAEP, we saw a lot of disparity. We had districts or states that had 80% of their students proficient on their state test, but when we looked at them on the NAEP, they ranked down in the bottom. And that's because each state could prepare their own standards, they could prepare their own assessments, and it was just a jumble. One of the common phrases that we used to hear was, we could judge a child's education by their zip code, because some states had far superior standards, more rigorous standards and demands than did some of the other states. And so the National Governors Association became concerned about that, and they decided what we needed was a common set of standards. But because they were governors, they were very concerned about their own states' rights. So this was definitely not a federal mandate, but rather a group of states. And in fact, our own governor at that time, Mike Huckabee, was very involved in the development of these standards and of seeing the push, rather, towards the standards. So they gave the job to the Council of Chief State School Officers and asked that they work to develop a set of standards in math and literacy. Traditionally, standards have started at kindergarten and built up in the past. One of the differences that the CC with the Common Core is that they took a set of college and career readiness standards. They said, what do students need in order to be ready for college and career? And they backwards mapped from that point. In the words of Stephen Covey, they began with the end in mind. So they started, if this is what students need to know when they leave high school, then what do they need to know in the 11th grade in order to be ready for the senior year? What do they need to know in the 10th, and so forth? And they backed that all the way down to kindergarten. And that was in an attempt to make sure that students were truly college and career ready when they left. These standards are more rigorous than our past standards have been. I was in a conversation with someone just the other day. We were laughing. Some of the naysayers that are opposing Common Core tell us that the Common Core standards are too rigorous, and in the same conversation told us that these standards were 2 years behind other nations. So we're trying to figure that out. And the only way I could put those two sentences together would be to think that our kids weren't capable as other countries. And I don't believe that's true at all. So I think these are very rigorous standards. They are markedly more challenging than Arkansas standards were. And this has been a source of challenge for our schools to meet that change, to ramp up and not leave anyone behind with that. They have a very coordinated structure. Sometimes in the past, our standards have been just sort of a random list of skills and things. Common Core state standards have paid a lot of attention to the progression of learning, both in literacy and math. One of the things that I have most appreciated is the depth of understanding of the folks who really spent a lot of time. In math, we had people like Bill McCallum, Jason Zumba, Phil Darrow, who are known authorities in mathematics across the country, who really worked. And these men had all spent a lot of time in their career looking at how students' learning progresses in a natural way, and that has been built into the math standards. We're going to look a little more at these. In English and language arts, the reading, there's actually four main sections. We have reading, writing, and I don't know if there's a way to make this room darker, if it's going to mess up the camera if we do that, because I know this is just so hard for you to read. Does that help a little bit? I love this room with all of the windows, but it's also kind of a two-edged sword, isn't it? All right, the reading is really a reading comprehension framework. In the past, sometimes we looked at some discrete skills that may help contribute to reading, but the emphasis was not as strongly focused on reading comprehension as they are now. Then there is the writing standards, the speaking and listening standards, and the language standards, where we get into grammar and all the different conventions and all. And then for the lower grades, there are standards specific to the reading foundational skills in K3. Our reading standards are based on the college and career readiness standards. There are 10 comprehensive standards, and we have basically, in a sense, the same standard at every grade level. It just goes a little deeper each time. And we have those same 10 standards expressed for literary fiction, and we have it for informational. And then in grade 6-12, there's a separate set of standards called literacy for the content areas, so history and science and social studies. That's kind of led to some of the misunderstandings about the literacy standards. You may hear someone say, well, they don't teach literature anymore in school because they have to do 70% informational text. Yes, the standards say that a child should encounter informational text during 70% of their day. The writers of the standards assumed that students would be attending science classes, social studies classes, economics classes, government classes, all of these other classes that will encompass the informational text, freeing the English teacher to really devote time to literacy. Another piece of the informational text that I think is really good is the emphasis on founding fathers documents, our founding government documents for our social studies teachers. There's a real emphasis to get back and teach students how to read and understand the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, the Gettysburg Address, some of these speeches that needed to have a more prominent role, I think, in our students' education. So within the way that those 10 are divided is at each grade level, 3 fall under the heading of key ideas and details, 3 more under craft and structure, 3 under integration of knowledge and ideas, and then the 1 range and level of text complexity. So under key ideas and details, students are being asked to consider, what did the text actually say? There's a real push within the Common Core standards to focus on the text and to get away from some of the touchy-feely kinds of things that we did in the past about how did it make you feel. Now you could still ask the question, how did it make you feel, but you're expected to go back and cite evidence from the text that would do that. Did this, when I read this story, it made me sad. Well, what in the text made you sad? Real evidence. And so the bottom line now for teachers as they work with the Common Core Standards in Literacy is to always go back to the text and keep the focus on the text that students are being asked to read. Under the key ideas and details, they're being asked to determine what that text says both explicitly and implicitly. They're looking at the central ideas or themes. They're looking at character development. They're making logical inferences, and they're citing that textual evidence. Under craft and structure, now we're looking at how did the author get that across. So we're looking at how to interpret the meanings of words and phrases. We're looking at how the text is structured. Helping students identify text structure goes a long ways towards helping them understand the meaning of the passage. We're looking at tone, helping them to identify when the different tone it could be. Is there sarcasm? I don't know if there's other Big Bang Theory fans in here, but I love that show. And Sheldon is always saying, are you being sarcastic? I missed it again. And there are many pieces, especially of literature, that if we miss the tone of the passage, we miss the truly comprehending what the author had intended. So helping students identify what we mean by tone and how do we determine the tone of a passage. The point of view, has a tremendous impact on our understanding of the passage, and helping students identify points of view and how that impacts the content of the meaning that was intended. So key ideas and details, craft and structure, and then the integration of knowledge and ideas. So what does that text really mean? And what's its value? How does it connect to other things that I have read? I hope you notice that implicit in these standards is the idea that frequently students are going to be asked to read the same text multiple times. Not every piece of text. Teachers are being asked to be very selective in some of the text that they choose so that they really deeply get into some of these passages and reread them and reread them and reread them to dig deeper and deeper and deeper into the text. And when they do that, they build some really important skills for students. And they help them identify some of these very important and key things. Notice that the information is not limited to print, but also digital. And it's not even always text. Within the Common Core Standards, we're also asking students to look at other ways of conveying information. You may be, for example, a teacher may be studying a unit on the Great Depression, and in addition to reading historical information about the Great Depression, may read passages from the Grapes of Wrath, may look at photos of the Dust Bowl, may look at a film clip from the Grapes of Wrath, and integrate all of these different points of view and perspective into deepening students' understanding. And this may be occurring in an English classroom, and it may be occurring in a history classroom. One of my first reactions when I first read through the literacy standards is I thought, and I bet Dr. Elliott may have had this thought, I want to go back in the classroom. I want to teach using these standards. Yes. And I thought, the first thing I thought is this would be fun. I think it would be so much fun to teach English with these standards because of all the different pieces you can weave in and the time you're taking to dig deeply into it and how integrated they are. And the last one, the 10th, is always the range and variety of the text that you're asking students to read. One of the interesting pieces that has come to light under Common Core State Standards that I really appreciate is the move to help take all students into a deeper understanding of grade level text, regardless of their reading ability. In the past, we have often wanted to take our students in special ed and give them simpler material. So if I'm in science and I'm studying volcanoes and I'm an 8th grade teacher and I have a student on a 4th grade level, in the past it's been typical to go back and pick up 4th grade material and give to this child so they understand. Under Common Core, what we're working hard to help teachers do and be able to do is scaffold that text so that I'm helping move this 8th grader from that 4th grade up to an 8th grade level and not letting him or her stay at that 4th grade level. We had Dr. Timothy Shanahan at our co-op just this week talking to about 100 educators on just some strategies for doing that very thing. Sometimes it may start with that 4th grade text to help develop knowledge, and then we build them on, then we take them to a book that's on a little deeper reading level, but they already have some knowledge of the content, and we keep stair-stepping them up until we get them where we want them to be. Sometimes it's the reading and the rereading and the rereading that we do with them to help them understand it. But the emphasis is on getting our kids up to the level where we want them to be and not allowing them to simply stay at that lower level. So how challenging and varied is the text? And then we go into writing. I want to do this kind of quickly because I've accidentally picked up the wrong PowerPoint just now, and the math is not on this one. So when we look at writing, there are 4 areas, 4 major headings, and again, there's 10 standards altogether. But we look at text types and purposes, the different types of writing, and the purpose for writing. We want students to really think about why they are creating that piece of text. And then the production and distribution. And how am I going to share this piece of writing? And this is going to involve some editing and rewriting. We may be sharing it electronically. We may be, there's a variety of means by which we can share it. We really are getting back into doing, I think, more research than we may have done in the past and working with students on building. And I know a lot of teachers who will start students on a simple, maybe a 1-page research project, and then you keep that same topic and you go deeper the next time. And you keep building and building and building your knowledge level on that particular topic. And then the range of writing, to have them write for a variety of purposes and audiences and all. A real push is on what is called argumentative writing. It could also be called persuasive writing. And that's where you make a stand on some particular issue. And so we want students to be able to back that up with research and with facts. So there's a real push to help them develop effective arguments. They also work on writing informative or explanatory text about a particular topic, and narratives. We've not gotten away from writing stories, and of course narratives can be fiction or nonfiction. I can write a story about my dog, I can write a story about a famous person, or I can do a biography, which would be another form of narrative. And looking at under production and distribution, we want students to think about how to meet various demands, whether it's the type of writing they're being asked to do, the audience that they're being asked to address, or what they're using to share their writing. And there's the research, how to conduct research and gather that information. So again, we want students to have a wide range of writing abilities. And then I think an area that maybe has gotten pushed to the side in recent years that is critically important is the speaking and listening. And so working with students, not only formal speaking, standing in front of a group and talking, but how to have conversations, right? And this, I think we feel, probably a lot of us, that this is a growing problem. Just like Joe mentioned earlier, I think it was Joe Quinn that mentioned the the cell phones, you know, and students spend so much time, and we could all share stories of people we know that sit in the same room and text each other, right? And we're losing that art of conversation, and that's a very important one. So a piece of speaking and listening is the ability to have a conversation. There's a lot more emphasis in the classrooms now with Common Core on having this structured dialogue on how to talk and how to carry on a conversation and how to have a disagreement of opinion in a respectful way. And I think that's a really critically important skill. So both formal, making presentations, and informal, having dialogue are both part of this speaking. And then the whole art of listening. How do I be a respectful listener in the classroom? And as students are making their presentations, the part of the PARCC assessment that Arkansas is participating in has a performance assessment attached to it in which students will be given a rubric to actually, as I listen to you present, here's a rubric on your presentation, but there will also be some rubrics in there on listening and how well are you listening to what I am saying. So these are both critically important skills that, because they couldn't really be measured on a standardized test, kind of got pushed to the side. It's not that we didn't have standards on speaking and listening in the past, but we kind of pushed them to the side a little too much, I think. And I'm really hoping that they're going to get the attention they need through Common Core. One of the skills that I think we heard mentioned today, and I know I've heard mentioned in similar discussions, I have a friend who teaches at UCA, and she heard business leaders say, these kids don't know their basics. And Linda finally got tired of hearing that. She's a math professor. And so she went to some of the businesses in her region and she said, what do you mean kids don't know their basics? Are you talking what, add, subtract, multiply, divide? Because if you're a math teacher, that is the basics, right? Computation. And they said, oh heavens no. We have machines that do all of that. We're talking about the ability to reason, to problem solve, to collaborate, to cooperate with other people. We can't teach that. We can teach students, we can teach new employees, I should say, how to do the programs that will do all of the computation. We can't teach them how to work together. So a part of what we want to do through this speaking and listening is teaching them the cooperation and the collaboration, I should say, and the comprehension. So as they work together in different project-based learnings, whether it be their oral presentations or the research projects or whatever, the push is on real-world problem solving. It's to help them learn how to effectively express their learning and to collaborate as they develop it. They've got to be able to present their knowledge in a variety of formats. That's still part of our speaking and listening, is how do I present this? We'll probably use some sort of technology, but not necessarily. But very often there will be technology involved. Then we go into language. The conventions of writing and speaking are still important. There's not a de-emphasis on those. What is interesting to me is that they're, in the old standards, you would see different grammatical conventions year after year after year after year. And if I pulled out a framework from the old standards and asked you what grade level this is, you could give me 4 different answers and you may all 4 be right, because it kept appearing over and over and over. Under the Common Core standards, they are taught in one specific grade, and then they're used in the successive grades. But you can go back, and I did this when they first came out and created a chart that says, here's what's taught at each grade level. And we had covered basically all the conventions through grade 5. So there's a real emphasis in the early grades. Then from then on, it's making sure the kids are using them appropriately and that they become an integral part of the student. We always want them to use those conventions. It's so important. You know, it was mentioned in the panel this morning about writing a policy statement and then someone rewriting it. I served on a panel for a number of years for one of the small high schools down in the River Valley area, that the faculty got together every year and they built a scholarship fund. And there were 3 or 4 of us who would serve on the panel to determine who got the scholarship. Most of these were valedictorian or salutatorian or honor graduates, and they wrote an essay and then they came and talked to us. And I was appalled at the simple grammatical errors in those papers. And I'm thinking, you've been recognized as valedictorian of your school and you are handing me this paper in an effort to win a scholarship, and you have mistakes that are 4th and 5th grade errors. I think we kind of got away for a while from that real emphasis on correct grammar, standard English, in our speaking. And I think we need to get back to that, and so that it's a very important part of the language standards that students do learn appropriate grammar, appropriate usage, verb, sentence, verb, subject, verb agreement, punctuation, and all those things. Vocabulary is a big part, and when we move into the PARCC assessments and we're looking at the way they're assessing it, it's looking at the context of the word and determining how does the student know what that meaning is, and can they really use that word in its context and use it appropriately. So helping students understand vocabulary at a deeper level is the important piece. And then K-5, especially K-3, they're looking at phonetics and fluency and helping students to read fluently and smoothly. So there's a big push in the lower grades on that. I'm not going to go through all of those. There's a ton of all of that. I did want to show you a little bit of how they progress. So if we look here, this is the results of that back mapping where they moved back down to kindergarten. So now if we move forward, this is under the big heading of key ideas. So here's a kindergarten standard. With prompting and support, ask and answer questions about details or informations in events. Now, if I move to first grade, look at how similar the question is, or the standard is. Ask and answer questions about key details or information and events. What do you see as the difference from kindergarten to first? Prompting and support. So that kindergarten teacher is giving more direct support to help build that skill, and now we expect that child in first grade to be able to do it independently. Now let's look at how that moves into second grade. Ask and answer such questions as. So now the teacher has guidance on just what it is we're expecting. Who, what, where, when, why, and how to demonstrate their understanding. And then in third grade, we're asking and answering questions to demonstrate understanding explicitly using the text as the basis for answers. So we're still doing everything that was here, but now we want that student to be able to go back and tell us from the text how they knew the answer to that question. Now, I dare say teachers are going to be doing a lot of that in through here, but this is what we want them to be able to do independently then in second grade, or third grade. Fourth grade, now we're drawing on those details and examples to support statements. So now the students are drawing conclusions or making statements about the text, and they're using those details. When they get to fifth grade, we want them to use actual quotes to support. Sixth grade, they are citing specific textual evidence to support analysis of what the texts say, both explicitly and inferentially. So you can see just the steady growth and development as students. It's a natural progression. 7th and 8th grade, we want them to cite several sources of textual evidence. And 6 through 8, we want them in social studies and history. These are the ELA standards. This is ELA for the content areas, social studies, history, technical subjects. So now as students move into the middle grades and they're in science and social studies classes, we want them to be able to use the text to support what they're saying. And then it goes on up, 9th and 10th grade, and on. So we're working all the way up then. Let me multitask for a minute. I take questions you have while I run back to the computer and switch my presentation so I can get the math in there. Does anyone have a question about the ELA standards, the literacy? Quiet. Do we have folks in here who have been working with these standards already? Do you have any K-12 teachers who have?
I haven't been working with them, but can I ask a question?
You certainly may.
Ricky Tompkins, Northwest Arkansas Community College, Vice President for Learning. So particularly at the higher end, when we talk about college readiness, we're certainly looking at that at the community college level. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we hear is how the PARCC assessment is going to be a better predictor and also assist with college placement, which is good for us.
Yes.
Right now, 75% of our incoming students test into developmental math, for instance. So that's the population that we serve. How is that, are y'all relating that back to, let's say, ACT scores, those PARCC assessments, or how is that being done to determine college readiness? Does that make sense?
It makes sense. And we had, as I understand it, folks from the university that's how they developed college and career readiness standards. And of course, David Coleman was a big piece of the English standards. He's now the head of College Board. And so there's that very coordinated approach to it there as well. But the idea was looking at what skills, when the standards were developed, there was two sets of standards developed simultaneously. There were K-12 standards in both math and literacy. There are also college and career readiness standards developed, and those were developed looking at what was needed to successfully enter and complete college. And then from those college and career ready standards, that's what they used to back down from and develop. Now, that's kind of a big philosophical stand on it. As far as then backing it down into the practical, how should this impact students entering your college? The PARCC assessment will have items built into the assessment that specifically address college and career readiness, and they will be able to use the data from those for students to be able to assist with placement in college. Because I know that's already a huge issue for you. I mean, that child I talked about that was valedictorian with the very poor grammar skills, I was one of those entering yours where what's our remediation rate is 40-some-odd%, and there are students. My son tells the story of standing in line when he was registering for classes and overhearing a conversation between two students, and one said, you know, I was valedictorian in my high school, and I'm thinking I'm about to flunk out of college first or second year. And so that has long been an issue, and it was part of what led to this whole movement to do that.
Can I say something about
Sure,
that, please?
I appreciate it.
Because I think that's just such an invaluable question, because if this thing works the way it should work, from my perspective as a legislator and as an educator in the real world, we would stop using SAT and ACT for purposes they were never intended. Now, we are just doing something in Arkansas and all over the country. ACT and SAT were never meant to be tests to determine whether or not you need to be remediated. They were meant to be used for admissions to colleges, not to be used by high schools to determine anything. We have just messed that up, and it's important people understand that for the longer discussion down the road. And we pulled a number pretty much out of the air because Oklahoma did. The number that we're using, y'all, are based for determining remediations based on 1984 data from Oklahoma with ACT to determine remediation. So that is why Common Core standards, I think, are so important, rather than something that we're using that was never meant to be about college readiness. This really gives us a chance to have something that from its genesis is about college and career readiness, which is not the point of ACT and SAT. So hopefully we will start to use them for what they were meant to, or for colleges to make decisions about, are you gonna be admitted? What kind of scholarship are you gonna get? Those kind of things that are really related to college. And then we can have a Common Core to help us know better at K-12, are we preparing kids to be ready for college and career? Because we don't know that by giving the ACT and SAT, because that's not what they were designed to do. The ACT will tell you that they've aligned all of their, their tests to the state standards. But obviously with our state standards, we need to up them, so how does that help us? I don't know what it's aligned to. And finally, they, both ACT and SAT are saying that, they will come up with what they call a concordance table, to relate what the students make on the ACT and SAT to what they make on Common Core that's gonna tell us something. But I think it's important as educators that we demand that they not mix the two anymore, because it's not service well. I just bet there are kids all over the state who are taking remedial courses based on bogus information, because that's not what they were meant to be used for.
Yeah, thank you.
Could I ask you though, because you're a little higher up than I am, but how many years do you think you're gonna be before you get reliable data?
Before what now?
You get reliable data?
I don't know the answer to that question, but.
Well, how would you think,
Well, I'm just gonna say, generally speaking, I think we would at least need to go through, starting back, I would at least say third grade and up, because that's when we start to have problems, that we can say for sure it's reliable. I think we can have data that can truly inform us from ninth grade up, that can really inform some of the things that we're doing. But for real reliability purposes, I think we would at least need to come third grade up,
I think it's gonna be 5 or 6 years before we
Yeah.
get reliable
Yeah.
data
And yeah.
that you can use at your level. It's
That's
gonna
right.
take a while.
That's why I think the ninth grade ups are so, because, and we need to be, I hope, that's a good point, because I hope we'll be thoughtful and patient with it.
Yeah.
So that we don't start going, look, see, the first year, everybody just went, yeah. That's what we tend to do. And we're gonna have to be, I think as an education community, stop letting other people keep telling us what the right measures are and when they ought to know. And key to that is saying to legislators, you don't know jack about this after 1 or 2 years, because you just don't, and that's, your voice is gonna be
Well,
important in that
we've taken
conversation.
apart, tests
Yeah.
that they're sending out, and I'll guarantee as a teacher, they're different,
Yeah, they are.
and they're tough.
Yeah, they are.
There are gonna be some real down times in Arkansas, like they're having in New York now. Their tests are horrible,
Sure.
horrible.
We
And it's just gonna take time.
We've gone through that in the past, though. We have to keep in mind, every time we change, like from the SAT Stanford, not the college one, to the MAT, there was always that dip, and so there will be. Laurie?
I'm not an educator, but I am gravely involved in this Common Core issue. There's a huge breakdown between the conversation that we're having here as you guys as educators and teachers and administrators and your teachers in the classroom, and then their correlation to that and the parents. So one of the things, and there seems to be a lot of talk about collaboration and community, and the gal in the general session talked about pulling in parents and engaging them. Somewhere, and maybe today's not the appropriate thing, but this is becoming a real hot button issue, as you probably know. And so we need to have an army of the people that understand the issue, word of mouth, getting it to your spheres of influence to help bring on those teachers that maybe aren't in the districts that are having successful implementation, and getting that word to the parents, because the words that we're hearing from running this campaign to help promote a positive positive image of Common Core and the assets that it brings to our state, is that teachers are telling parents that Common Core is the reason their kids are failing, is the reason, that it's the hit all for everything negative about education.
But
So-
it's to be expected.
But with that
I mean,
conversation not being
I
had.
was educated, you were educated, not under Common Core. We teach not under Common Core, we teach as we've been educated. So we have a whole generation of teachers that are out there teaching that have to change. Not that change is bad, I'm not against it at all, but I'm saying we have to expect the resistance. We have, and like you said, to be proactive and do what we can, but it's just to be expected. It's going to be a difficult
I'm
time.
glad to hear these questions. I'm Jeff Terrell. I'm new Dean of College of Education and Human Services at John Brown. I'm a psychologist by training, so I'm listening to this stuff, and the question that comes up for me is, well, what about implementation? And what are the mechanisms of getting this Common Core implemented, and what happens if there are problems that are cropping up, and how?
There's multiple answers to that. And we've had quite a bit of direction from our State Department, but also our local schools, especially in this area, have been very proactive in the implementation. There was a study just completed this spring by the University of Arkansas, and one of the things they found in that study is that implementation in districts that have open, collaborative leadership, implementation is doing very well. In districts that are closed, top-down kind of leadership, a lot of pushback. And part of that is in some of those districts, there are things being pushed out as being Common Core that aren't, It's like textbooks. The final version of the Common Core standards were released in the spring of 2010, and that fall already, by August, there were books out stamped Common Core aligned.
So what happens to those districts where there's not open, collaborative leadership, where there are problems? That's my question. What happens?
A lot of missed opportunities, a lot of pushback from parents, a lot of pushback from teachers. And that pushback from teachers often leads to more pushback from parents, because out in parents' world, teachers have more validity than administrators a lot of times. So that really impacts the message. Yes, ma'am?
Well, I believe that there's conflicting information, so if it's not being interpreted properly,
Yes.
your child is going to struggle. My name is Patrice Whitley. I'm a Title III director at MWAG, but also the parent of 2 children, one in a charter school, high school, one in a public school, who's in middle school. I've seen more impact with my son who's in middle school versus my daughter at charter school, and she's very frustrated. And again, I want to be able to understand SMART Core so that I can speak knowledgeably to her to help her to understand it, which is why I'm trying to educate myself. But there are other parents who are pushing back.
There are, and I've got to wrap this up. I want to show you just a couple of things real quickly. If you will come back, we'll get into math, because the 2 sessions, this breakout session following the break highlights math in Common Core. But one of the big misconceptions is what Common Core is and isn't. Common Core state standards are simply a set of standards. As you saw those a while ago, students should be able to ask and answer questions. It doesn't say how a teacher teaches. It doesn't say what curriculum they use. My favorite analogy, and maybe I got this partly because I have a son who's an architect, but if we consider the building analogy, the building industry, then Common Core state standards are like the building code that is going on. I also heard it applied to football games. There's a code for what size your football field has to be. There are certain rules that you follow in the game of football, though, no matter where you play. The blueprints that are developed, to align with that is like the curriculum. But every architect's going to draw up their own blueprints for whatever. The architect and possibly the contractor is kind of like the instruction going on. And then finally, there's a building inspector. And your buildings can all look different, and they can serve different purposes. But they have to set. I was working on this the other night, and my son is working from home right now. And he said, well, Mom said, in architecture, you have the International Building Code that everyone in the country has to follow. Then states can add to that, and counties can add to that, and cities can add to that. But they all have to meet that International Building Code no matter what. So when we think about a cityscape, all of these buildings serving different purposes, looking different, using different architects, different blueprints, but they all had to meet the building code, and they all had to have a building inspector to see that they were. Park or Smarter Balanced or whatever test a state chooses to use is the building inspector. And one of the other big miscommunications, some people, if you really listen to criticism of Common Core, what you hear is criticism of the assessment. Two totally different discussions. We could do away with standards, we would still be required to do testing. And some people seem to have the idea that if we reject Common Core, we don't have to do testing. Totally inaccurate. We still have, that's No Child Left Behind, that's still federal law. So they are simply a set of goals that we want students to attain by the end of a grade level. Every district has the option of choosing how they're meeting that. What textbooks they use, whether they even use a textbook. Do they use a constructivist approach in math, or do they use a traditional approach in math? Regardless of what, that's a local decision. All that is mandated right now is that they teach to those end of the year or end of the course standards. I appreciate your time in here. We're going to take a short break, and then we'll come back in here, and we have Brooke Bradley to talk to us about a fourth grade math perspective, and then we have a high school math perspective coming up.